I had an idea that I was going to end up delivering the baby. Of course, we planned to have a midwife, but I knew that I need to be ready just in case. And it was in May 28th. So it's still nice outside. And I just went out and I just looked up at the sky and really took note of the moon. It was like really luminescent. And I saw that 3/4 moon with that slice missing from the moon. And a friend of my mom's had came and dropped off like a big pile of compost out there like some weeks prior to that. And just went out there and dug my hands in the dirt and just, I guess it was my own little moment I was having. And I just knew, it wasn't even nothing verbal, but I just knew that I was going to end up growing food. I knew that the only way I could provide for my family was going to be through, taking matters into my own hands and just trying to grow at least enough food for our family. So that was really like the genesis of my growing food more seriously. Well, since I started in prison, I will begin my story in prison. Can't omit, in prison, I was a new vegan. I was like very sensationalized around food. We were very disgruntled about these paltry amounts of food that being put on the tray. When we was going through this one morning, they gave us the least amount of food. We was like, nah, you eat it. You know what I'm saying? We just pushed the food back in there like, you ain't gonna give us no food. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, nah, we can't. We talk to the inmates because they're the ones who passing out the food, but the food administrator be behind them. I got thrown in isolation for that. And trying to get out of there, I wrote a letter to the administration for as a grievance form against not having enough calories on the food. And it ended me up in the office of the food administrator. So that was pretty much an accomplishment because I got to walk into a lot of hidden spaces that I never knew about. So I walked into the kitchen and walked into a back room. I walked past all the big cans of food that they, the slop that they feed us. And I walked into this back room that was an office, and he pulled it up on the screen and was like, this is what we allow to serve you. And I almost had recall. I think it was like 2,154 calories. Like it was lower than high schoolers, but it was higher than middle school. And that's including like all the ketchup, all the mustard. You had to clean your tray to get that amount. And I was just distraught. I didn't know how to beat that. You know what I mean? So upon being let out, back into society, and I touched back down in society as a so-called vegan. So I was very particular about the food that I was eating. But being in East Winston, there wasn't a lot of vegan choices in the grocery store. Fresh produce section looks different than the western side of town. Like if you go into the produce section, our food looks like it's withering, and you just have to look too hard to find fresh food. That's really made me feel like I was still in prison to a degree. And these concrete jungles or this concrete habitat, it wasn't too much different than a prison cell in the prison compound. I just had to do what was necessary to sustain my lifestyle, so I started growing my own food, certain things, what I could grow. Even my yard here where I stay at wasn't enough. I started in the backyard, and there's a lot of shade back there, and I couldn't really get enough food growing, fruiting. So I started running around to different lots in the neighborhood. And there was a couple of lots over here on the next street that we used to grow a lot of food at. And every year, it'd always be some drama with the landlord. So I remember one fall, it was like right before Thanksgiving. And I looked forward to, I had never grown cauliflower like that. So I went through all the steps. And right before Thanksgiving, I went out there to harvest it. And everything was cut down to the ground. It was very traumatizing. It was very traumatizing because we had plans for that food. And, My first response honestly was to try to find a way to buy that land. We can't continue to grow food on somebody else's property. We need to have some property of our own. That really spurred this whole initiative of growing food in abandoned lots. So from there, we had conversations with Cooperative Extension. That was something that supposedly moved the urban farming a step forward in the city, but we never really had any buy-in from the city. So we're allowed to really benefit from that ordinance. It was more of something that the city could brag about, but it didn't translate into any more equity for the community. It didn't translate into any more ownership. It didn't really nudge us more to closing the gap on food disparity. So we're still at a great deficit in all those aspects. That's what really caused us to really make our organization Island Cultures. We basically define our community as an island because, we are so close knit. It's like, it's not a lot of separation between the families, whether it's black or brown, old or young, and we try to make our community a destination to be reached. Historically we've been denied a lot of equality. There hadn't been a lot of attention given to our community from the government or from the foundations. Island Cultures has been very deliberately going through these matters and trying to learn more about the policy and representation, and take up various seats with the city, and get out here and start gardens. So we've been in different communities, and we've started a few gardening projects. Some have been relegated to others, where we've started them, and other peoples have made opportunities for themselves and came in and took off with the project. And that's just a place that's just humbling. It's not necessarily just going into space and growing food, but actually learning how to raise the value of that product, and being political enough to be out here to shift the needle on policies that's going to allow us to access more secure spaces, and also shift policy towards holding these institutions accountable. Island Cultures is just in the mix of all that, and doing our part and just holding our space in this ecosystem, in this food system. Show that you're a leader though, for real. Needs to get jaded.
I guess that's the go-to.
Needs to get jaded.
Yeah.
Hey, sunshine, can I get a hug?
Yeah.
That was something that we were adamant about having up here, EBT SNAP, because we're right here in the midst of a very, very hyper-localized food desert. You know what I'm saying? And that's going to allow the dollar to be circulated right here in the neighborhood. It won't never leave the neighborhood. So it's going to be a way to kind of grow an economy right here in the community. We're just going to try to return the sap to the root. You know what I mean? This is Zabali Kupu. Zabali means patience. This is a name that's been circulating in the community. We've been hollering Sabali for a long time in the island community. And that's just something that people say to each other, like patience, patience, patience. You know what I mean? Like, we've been a very embattled community, and we've been very resilient. You know what I mean? It might look bleak in the beginning, like there might be a lot of hardships associated with it, but it's definitely worth the struggle and just remain patient. It's a beautiful surprise in the end for you. Just being in a place where we are active in that, and not just people on the sideline looking at the story, but actually participating with the story and where it goes from here. We think that can be a major way to restore equity and restore justice to the community. That comes out of necessity. Like, I never imagined myself being a farmer or being a food proponent. You can't always depend on people to do the best thing for you. You know what I mean? Even if it's obvious, like, we can't depend on if it's a food shortage that there'll be a pantry. Can't depend on food stamps or, these government crisis intervention. We got to be able to do for ourselves. I can't just send my children off with just a prayer and a notion, and we don't know what tomorrow's gonna look like, and it makes me feel restored. Like I could feel the restoration. I could feel my cup being filled when I see that, because this is much greater than me.